Hello everyone! As you may know, The Legend of Zelda, aka the greatest video game franchise ever created, has turned 35 this year. On February 21st, 1986, The Legend of Zelda was born, making this the year of Zelda for its 35th anniversary. And to celebrate that, I'm going to rank the 8 dungeons/temples from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, my all-time favorite Zelda game and my all-time favorite game in general. So let's go ahead and get started ranking these dungeons and temples. To start off this list is none other than inside the Great Deku Tree. This is the very first 3D Zelda dungeon, and with that, it is the most basic because it is a tutorial teaching the player how 3D dungeons will work in Zelda. It does it okay, but because it is a tutorial, it's very short and there's a lot of interruptions with dialogue explaining a lot of basic things like how to climb vines, how to open doors, how to dive underwater, all these different things, teaching you how to do just all the little basic stuff that a tutorial dungeon will do. And it does it all well, but that breaks the flow of the dungeon, having to stop every 5 seconds to explain a new thing and how it works. Now, this dungeon does do other things really well, such as the music. I really like the music in the Great Deku Tree. It sounds calm, it's pretty interesting, it's mysterious, it sounds like it's something that's been abandoned for a while. So I do like the theme music of the Great Deku Tree. I also like some of the puzzles. None of the puzzles are like super elaborate or anything, but they are interesting enough to kind of start you off in a 3D Zelda. And I also like the final boss, Queen Goma. Queen Goma is a very interesting spider parasite type creature, and I think it's a cool first boss to kick off The Legend of Zelda in 3D. So that right there is the Great Deku Tree. I have it ranked at number 8 because, like I said, at the end of the day, it's nothing more than a tutorial dungeon. There's nothing like super exciting about it or anything like that. And if you were able to cut out all the dialogue and explaining how to do things and was able to just go straight through it, you could probably beat the whole dungeon in roughly 5 minutes. So it's not super long or anything like that. And so with that, I have to rank it at number 8. So let's go ahead and move on to number 7. At number 7, we have inside Lord Jabu. This is the 3rd dungeon in Ocarina of Time that you will explore. Being one of the first 3, it is another tutorial style dungeon where you will learn a few new tricks, and because of that, it's just a short little easy dungeon, nothing too overly complicated. I would say my biggest annoyance with this dungeon is Princess Ruda. She's very annoying because she has a lot of dialogue that she has to get through, and then even then, if you lose her, if you drop her, if you go ahead of her, anything like that, she'll go back to where you found her. Then you have to talk to her again, and she'll tell you how rude you are and all this other stuff. And so keeping up with Princess Ruda is kind of annoying. Aside from that, the rest of the dungeon isn't too bad, other than the fact that it's kind of short. But again, it's a tutorial dungeon, so I won't mark too much against that for it being short. One thing that I really do love about this dungeon, though, is the theme music. The theme music goes off of the heartbeat and all the other different organs and things like that, and so you can hear that in the music, and it's really interesting how that sounds. So I really do like that, and the final boss was also pretty cool too. It was like this electrical baronade, I think is the name of it, and I think it was just a really cool boss because it had so much going on with him. He had the electrical powers and the different little patterns that he would attack with. So Baronade was definitely a cool final boss. And so for that, I give Lord Jabu the number 7 spot. Let's move on to number 6. At number 6, we have the Dongos Cavern. This is the 2nd dungeon in Ocarina of Time that you will go through, and it is the final of the tutorial style dungeons on this list. Being another tutorial style dungeon, it is short and easy to get through, but it is easily the best of the 3 tutorial dungeons. Now, the first thing that I really like about the Dongos Cavern is that it really sets off that adventure feel, because unlike inside the Great Deku Tree, you're in your little bubble of Kokiri Forest. Link has been here his whole life, so he hasn't really done any adventuring yet. But once you get through that and you go out into Hyrule and you're out in the open, that is when the adventure truly starts, and it starts with the Dongos Cavern. And so I really love that aspect of this dungeon. Now, another thing I really love is the music. We gotta talk about the music. I love the music. In Dongos Cavern, it really feels like there's danger, it's evil, it's, menacing. It just sounds so much different than what we heard in the Great Deku Tree. This sounds like real danger. And so I really love that with the whole theme of what we get into Dongos Cavern. So the music has definitely got a completely different touch to it compared to what the first dungeon had. So I like that. And then my most favorite thing about the Dongos Cavern, without question, is the amount of enemies that this dungeon has compared to the other two tutorial dungeons. You've got Beamos, you've got Lizathos, you've got Armos, you've got Fire Keys, and of course you've got the Dongos. So there are just so many types of enemies into Dongos Cavern, and that's not even all the enemies. I mean, there's a few others that I didn't name, but those are just a couple of them. So the Dongos Cavern is packed with so many different enemies, and I love that. And then, of course, King Dodongo being the final boss is a giant Dodongo, and it's really cool to see. And he's not overly complicated. You just got to throw a couple bombs in his mouth and hit him a few times with your sword, and then he's out. But it's just a cool dungeon. Definitely my favorite of the 3 tutorial dungeons, and that's why I have it sitting at number 6. So Dodongo's Cavern is number 6. Let's go ahead and move on to number 5. At number 5, we have the Shadow Temple. This is the 7th of the 8 main dungeons that you will explore through, and the first of the temple type dungeons on our list. Now, the thing that I love about the Shadow Temple most is, of course, the dark, eerie, mysterious nature of it. It's really cool to explore the hidden darkness of Hyrule in this temple. You go in it and you see all these traps and all the skeletons that are lying around and just all the different things about it, and it's really cool to explore that and see that Hyrule has a dark side hidden well beneath this temple, and it's really cool just to go through that and see that and explore it. So I really like that dark lore that you get out of the Shadow Temple. That's the coolest part about this whole thing. It also has cool concepts with the Lens of Truth, using the Lens of Truth to find hidden objects that you couldn't find otherwise. That's really cool, and seeing traps that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise, solving puzzles that you wouldn't be able to solve without the Lens of Truth. So implementing the Lens of Truth is a really cool feature that this temple has to offer. And so I would say those are 2 of the strongest parts of it. And then, of course, the music. The music is really cool. You've got like this demon slash angel, both of them are kind of making this tune, and it sounds really cool, and it really fits in with the setting of the Shadow Temple. It's like eerie and dark, and you're not really sure what's going on, and it's really cool. So I really love the music of the Shadow Temple because it fits so well with the atmosphere. It feels like the darkness of Hyrule in this temple, and so the music is great. The mechanic of using the Lens of Truth along with the hover boots, because that's where you get them, is in the Shadow Temple, so the hover boots are pretty cool. And then, of course, Bongo Bongo, final boss, really cool final boss. He's got the 2 hands, he plays on the bongo, that's the actual stage in which you are standing on, and then he's got the big red eye and everything. I really like Bongo Bongo, one of my favorite bosses in Zelda, so Bongo Bongo, definitely a cool boss. Now, the things that I don't like about this temple, mainly, it's very linear. You can get right through it, no problem. I would say, out of the temple dungeons, it's the easiest one, in my opinion. It's just not that hard. You get in there, and you just go through it. And it's pretty simple. It's not too overly complicated. The puzzles aren't too hard to figure out. And so, that's one knock on it for me. Another knock is there's no real unique enemies that I can really think of off the top of my head in this dungeon. This temple just has enemies that we've already seen, like the Stalfos, the Beamos, I think a few keys, things like that. There's no unique enemy to the Shadow Temple. All of them we've already seen at some point. Even things like the Dead Hand we saw in the bottom of the well before this. So it's like it doesn't have its own unique thing until I think you get to Bongo Bongo, and then you finally see something that's unique. It's the final boss. So that is also a very weak part for me, is the variety of enemies is very lacking in the Shadow Temple. Whereas in the last temple we talked about, the Dongos Cavern was loaded with a bunch of unique enemies that we were seeing, and it was really cool to see that. Now, luckily though, it does have enemies, so it's not like it's nothing in there. It does have enemies, it's just recycled enemies, and that's the only downfall in my opinion. But other than that, it's a really cool dungeon temple, and it's really cool to explore, and I do like it, and that's why I have it at number 5. So let's go ahead and move on to number 4. At number 4, we have the Spirit Temple. The Spirit Temple can either be the 4th or 5th temple that you explore through, depending on what order you decide to do things, switching around with the Shadow Temple. One thing that I really like about the Spirit Temple is that it requires you to be both Child Link and Adult Link to get through it all. You first have to be Child Link to get the Silver Gauntlets, and then once you get those, you can be Adult Link to get through the rest of the Spirit Temple. So I really like that concept because it utilizes both Child Link and Adult Link, something that none of the other temples ever do. The only other temple that does something similar would be the Shadow Temple, where you're required to be Child Link to go into the bottom of the well and retrieve the Lens of Truth, but the bottom of the well is sort of its own mini dungeon, sort of like the Ice Cavern is its own mini dungeon when you go to get the Iron Boots. So it's a very unique concept that the Spirit Temple has, and it's one of the things that I like about it. The next thing that I like is the atmosphere and music. You know, it's very interesting. It's got the Egyptian vibe going on. It's in the desert. It all fits really well together. You've got cool little artifacts in this temple. You got giant statues. You got little symbols on the wall. All this little stuff. It really fits together, and the music really puts it all together too, giving it a very ancient Egyptian vibe to it. So I really like that. The next thing that I really like are the puzzles and how they all kind of really center around using light and reflection. You know, you have the mirror shield, of course, and then on top of the mirror shield, you've got like different little mirrors that you have to pull around and move and all this other stuff. And so using the light is a very big theme in the puzzles. You even got like little symbols of suns and stuff like that you have to reflect light on to activate doors and things like that. So using light is a pretty interesting thing. And even to get into the boss room, you have to use the mirror shield to reflect light on the giant statue's face and make it crumble apart so that you can get to the door to the boss room. So very interesting how you use light in this temple and how it, you know, fits into the puzzle. So I really like that. I also like the Iron Knuckle. The Iron Knuckle is one of my favorite enemies in Ocarina of Time. It's just a really cool, unique enemy that you kind of dictate the flow of the fight. By getting close to it, it will attack you. And once it attacks you and you dodge it, it will become vulnerable and you can attack it. You continue to do this, and eventually its armor will fall off and it will become quicker, and so you have to time your dodges a little bit quicker as well. And it's just a fun fight. It's a lot of strategy to it. If you get hit, you take a lot of damage, but luckily there are pillars and stuff where you can have the Iron Knuckle hit the pillars and it'll expose hearts, and you can replenish yourself. And so it's just a really fun mini boss with a lot of strategy, and that's why I like it so much. And you fight it a couple times in the Spirit Temple, so that's really cool. The next thing that I like, of course, is the final boss. The two witches, Kotek and Kume, where they're the two witches of fire and ice. Really cool boss fight. You utilize the mirror shield where you absorb their energy and fire it back at them. It's a very cool concept. And then of course they fuse into Twin Rova, the final boss form, where they are now a fire ice fusion, and you have to concentrate their element of either fire or ice 3 times into the mirror shield and blast it back at them, and do that a few times to defeat them. So I really like it. And overall, there's not too many things that I can really complain about when it comes to the Spirit Temple. It's got good music, it's got good atmosphere, it's got good puzzles, all the enemies are really interesting, and so that's the things that I like about it. And there's not too many things that are weak about it. And the only reason I have it at number 4 is that I just like the other temples up next a little bit more. So it was really hard to put it at 4 because I like it so much, but at the same time I like the other ones slightly more, and so I just had to put it at number 4. But there's not really any negative reason for that. It's just I like the other ones slightly more. So there's the Spirit Temple at number 4. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. At number 3, we have the Water Temple. The Water Temple is the third temple in the game and the sixth overall location that you'll have to explore through. Now, the Water Temple is not a very popular temple amongst most fans of Ocarina of Time due to the fact that it is a bit confusing as to where to go. It's very slow paced. You have to constantly pause the menu screen to put on and take off your iron boots, at least in the N64 version. They fixed it in the 3DS version where you didn't have to do that. But overall, it's just not a very popular temple to the fans. However, a lot of those aspects are what I love about the Water Temple. I love the fact that the Water Temple is basically the puzzle itself. Rather than having a bunch of small individual puzzles, it actually is the whole puzzle itself, where you raise or lower the water levels depending on what it is you need to do, and then from there you go into these different little areas and find different keys and stuff like that so that you can continue to progress in the Water Temple. So it's a really cool concept, and so I like the fact that the Water Temple is like this big puzzle, and it's a maze because you're going through all these different pathways in the walls and you're trying to figure out where to go. So that's really a cool concept that the Water Temple has. And then the music is really cool. You know, it's really just a chilling, relaxing, peaceful music in this Water Temple that I really like. And I would actually say that this is possibly my favorite temple theme in Ocarina of Time, with maybe one or two other temple themes rivaling it. I mean, it's really good. I really do enjoy the Water Temple music. It's just really relaxing, and I just like that. Next, I want to talk about these enemies. You know, Water Temple, it being a Water Temple, there aren't too many crazy enemies or anything like that, because it's the Water Temple. Most of the time you're going to be underwater, and underwater you can only use the hook shot, and so you're not going to have a lot of enemies, but there are some enemies in the game, such as you have the blue Tektites, you have the spikes at the bottom of the Water Temple, there's the keys, of course, you've got shell blades, and a couple other enemies in the Water Temple, but they're not too crazy because, again, most of them you can only use the hook shot on, so there's that. But it does have one of the coolest mini bosses next to the Iron Knuckle, and that is Dark Link. Dark Link is such a cool mini boss because he's Link's shadow. Whatever Link does, Dark Link does, and that really can make it kind of complicated to fight against him unless you have something like the Megaton Hammer, in which he's cake. Because he doesn't have a Megaton Hammer, you can hit him every time with it. But if you're using the Master Sword, it's a little trickier because he copies your moves and you have to be pretty good at that to be able to defeat him with the Master Sword. But still, it's a very fun concept. I really like the idea of fighting your own shadow, and it's one of the best mini bosses in the game. Like I said, it's right there with the Iron Knuckle. It's just such a good mini boss, and is one of the highlights to the Water Temple. And in my opinion, it's the best fight in the Water Temple because the final boss, Morpha, is the weak part of the Water Temple, because Morpha is just a bit of a disappointment. Morpha is this nucleus type thing in this pool of water, and the way you defeat it is you use the long shot to reel it in, and then you slash at it, and in concept that sounds pretty okay, but the problem is that you can trap the nucleus in a corner and end it right there. See, on concept, it would be like you hit it a couple times, it jumped back in the pool, and then you do that maybe 2 or 3 more times, but because of this one little trick you can do, you can end that fight so quickly, and it's so disappointing. You know, especially with how frustrating the Water Temple can be, especially on like your first try. It can take you forever to do the Water Temple, especially if you forget that one key, but you know, once you get there and you fight that thing, it's so disappointing compared to Dark Link, who is very complicated to take out when you're using a Master Sword, and then Morpha over here is just a bit of a downside. So that's the one thing that I have a little bit of a complaint about the Water Temple, is just the final boss was a bit lackluster. But other than that, the music, the Water Temple being a kind of a massive puzzle concept, and Dark Link are all huge highlights of this puzzle, or of this temple, and it's why I have it at number 3, is because of that. So that is the Water Temple sitting at number 3. Let's go ahead and move on to number 2. At number 2, we have the Fire Temple. The Fire Temple is the second of the 5 main temples that you will explore through, and the 5th overall.
Now you can do the Fire Temple first once becoming adult Link, switching around with the Forest Temple. But let's go ahead and talk about why I have this one at number 2. First off, I love the concept of the Fire Temple and how it's inside of Death Mountain itself. That's a cool concept that not a lot of 3D Zeldas have actually done. Only Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess have really gone inside of Death Mountain as a place for a temple. All the other 3D Zeldas, either A, Death Mountain isn't around, like in Majora's Mask or Wind Waker, or like in Breath of the Wild, there is a Death Mountain, but you don't go inside of it directly. You just kind of go over it and around it and things like that. So it's a really cool concept that those two games share, and I like it. I like the atmosphere of the Fire Temple. You've got a bunch of different little statues and things like that. You, of course, got fire, you've got lava, and it's just a really cool setting. So I really like that. And then when you get into the Fire Temple, you'll work your way up to the top. You'll start from the lower level, and you'll work your way up. And I think that's a pretty cool concept also. Once you get the Megaton Hammer, there's a little platform that you'll eventually find, and you'll hit it, and it will take you back to where the boss room is so that you can reach the boss door. So it's a really cool concept in that regard too, of starting from the lower levels, working your way up to the top, only to come all the way back down to the bottom so that you can reach, the final destination. So I really do like that. There's also Gorons and stuff like that you'll have to help throughout the temple. Once you save them, they'll give you some tips. This can be very useful if you're a new player, but if you're a veteran player, you'll probably just skip talking to the Gorons and grab the keys and be on your way. But I do like that concept of getting tips from the Gorons. Puzzles in this temple aren't too over the top. They're fairly easy for the most part. There is a maze at some point that you'll have to go through, but it's not too hard. But most of the puzzles are things like using your arrows to shoot one of those eye symbols, or hitting one of those crystals to cause fire to temporarily go away or something. So none of the puzzles in the Fire Temple are really that complicated, but they are there and they offer a little bit of an entertainment. So I do like the puzzles for that. Then on top of that, you've got the music, and I love the Fire Temple's music. I grew up playing the early version on the N64 that had the chanting, so that's just what I prefer. I think it's more unique. I think it sounds a little bit better, fits a little bit more well with the Fire Temple's setting. But the later version is just as good, and it sounds just fine. It's just every time I hear it, I think of the Shadow Temple, because it's essentially the Shadow Temple's theme being reused. But like I said, it's just a matter of preference, so either one goes. I just like the chanting theme a little bit more. Onwards, the enemies in this temple are all pretty cool too. Some that we've seen before, such as the like, the fire keys, regular keys, things of that nature, but there also are a couple of unique enemies like the torch slugs. You've got red bubbles, you got a couple trap doors, and then there's also like flying tiles and things like that. So there are a couple of interesting enemies throughout the Fire Temple, but then you have the temple's mini boss. Temple's mini boss is this thing called the Flare Dancer, which you will face off against twice, and it's a pretty interesting and unique mini boss. Definitely not as exciting as something like the Iron Knuckle from the Spirit Temple or Dark Link from the Water Temple, but it gets the job done, and it's still entertaining enough. It's not super complicated. It's kind of easy. In fact, sort of like Morpha from the Water Temple, you just use your hook shot to pull it towards you, and then from there you'll slash it a couple times, and that's pretty much it. But again, it is unique and it is interesting enough, so I do like it. And then, of course, there's the final boss and the best part of this whole temple, and that is Volvolgia the Dragon. I love Volvolgia the Dragon. For the longest time, Volvolgia was my all-time favorite enemy boss in Ocarina of Time, and probably Zelda altogether. It's just really cool. It's a dragon. What's not to love? He has these pits of lava that he can pretty much go through and kind of pop up from any direction, and then he can go up into the sky, cause rocks to fall, all these things. So there's a lot going on with this fight, and I really love it. It's just fun. It's just entertaining, and it isn't too complicated once you get used to it and you know like what to do, but it is pretty interesting to go up against this dragon, hit it in the face with the Megaton Hammer, all that good stuff, and it's just a fun challenge. And so I really do like Volvagia as a final boss. I like the Fire Temple all together. Growing up, it was my favorite temple, and so nostalgia definitely does play another role in why I have it ranked so high. But yes, that is the Fire Temple sitting at number 2, and why I love it so much. Let's go ahead and get ready to move on to number 1. At number 1, we have the Forest Temple. The Forest Temple is the very first temple that players will be instructed to head towards once becoming adult Link. This is a really cool and interesting temple as it has this abandoned mansion theme going on, and I really like that. When you get inside of it, there's a lot of plant life that has grown inside of it, structures that are broken and destroyed, and it just has a very haunted theme going on, almost like a Resident Evil vibe. And I really do enjoy that. It's really cool and interesting. And this temple has been abandoned for quite some time, as the stairway outside leading to it is completely destroyed. Even in the child portion of the game, this stairway is still found to be destroyed, signifying that this temple has been abandoned for quite some time, even before the events of Ocarina of Time ever began. So I really like that. It brings forth a lot of mystery and theories, such as, how long has it been abandoned? What was it used for before it became abandoned? Who occupied it during that point of time? All kinds of cool little things to think about. And that's why I really like this temple, is there's just a lot of mystery to it. On top of the mystery is the theme music. The theme music is very mysterious. It really brings forth that feeling of wonder, of what's going on, what's happening. It's very unique. It fits well with this temple, and I really do like it. I would say that the Forest Temple's music is probably one of my favorite themes in Ocarina of Time as far as temple themes go. It's definitely top 2 or 3. It's just so good. Sounds really well, and I really do enjoy listening to it as I explore this temple. Then you have all these puzzles that the Forest Temple has within it. It's packed full of a lot of interesting puzzles. Some are complex, some are more simplistic, but it's got a very nice list of puzzles. You've got things like one room where there's an eye symbol that's frozen, and you have to use the torch in the center to thaw it out. Then you have other eye symbols that when you hit them, they twist the hallways and cause the room leading to those to completely shift and change. That's a really cool concept. Then there's other things like pushing blocks around, and even to get to the final boss, you have to push the walls and kind of shift them around to open up the path to get to the boss room. So there's plenty of really cool and interesting puzzles found within this Forest Temple, and I love that. Then you have all the different variety of enemies and things like that. This Forest Temple is packed full of just so many enemies. You've got things like the big Deku Babas, you've got Floor Masters, Wall Masters, Wolfos, Stalfos, etc. I mean, there's just so many enemies that keeps it fresh and exciting, and so I really love it for that. Every room you go in, there's the possibility of there being something else new to encounter and go up against. And then you have, of course, the mini bosses, which are the Poe Sisters, 4 of them, and it's just really cool to go up against these. 2 of them require you to shoot these paintings of them. That will summon them to come out, and then you fight them. Then the other 2 have a bit more unique approach, where one of them requires you to push these blocks to form a picture of it, and then it will come out. And then the final one is found in the main corridor of the mansion, where this Poe Sister uses duplicates of itself, and you have to find the real one, which spins around. And so it's really cool. I love the Poe Sisters. They're very interesting. They're definitely up there with the likes of Dark Link and the Iron Knuckle as far as interesting and fun to go up against mini bosses. And then once you defeat them, all 4 torches will be relit, the elevator will come back, and then you can get ready to head to the final boss, which is Phantom Ganon. And I love Phantom Ganon. He's just really cool, really interesting. He's very fun to go up against. First off, he shows up in like all the different paintings and stuff as he jumps out with his horse and everything, and then he has the little tennis match and everything. So he's just a cool mini boss, or a final boss. I really do love Phantom Ganon. Definitely one of my favorites amongst the Ocarina of Time bosses. Definitely up there with like Volvagia and things like that. So Phantom Ganon, definitely a highlight. Even his intro is really cool, how he first appears to be Ganondorf himself, but then he takes off the mask and it's Phantom Ganon. I mean, it's just such a cool final fight in this Forest Temple. So all of those things are why I really love this temple, why it's my number 1. It's just got a really cool atmosphere to it. Theme music is great. The bosses are all great. The enemy variety is great. There's nothing that I don't love about the Forest Temple. It's just perfect. And so it's just great. It's a really good way to kick off the adult portion of the game. It's just fantastic. There's no complaints for me as far as the Forest Temple is concerned. It's the perfect length. Everything about it is fantastic. And so that is why I have it sitting at number 1. So there you have it. That is my number 1 favorite temple in Ocarina of Time, the Forest Temple. So there you have it. That is my ranking of the 8 main temples and dungeons found in Ocarina of Time. I had a lot of fun making this video, going back through, listening to all the music, and just seeing where I wanted to place each dungeon and everything. So really fun to make this video. And if you want to, you can leave a comment with your ranking of these temples and dungeons and just see where we agree or disagree, because I'm sure we have our differences in opinion. But I'm going to go ahead and get ready to end this video here. So thanks for watching, and I will see you all on the next one. See you then.